Welcome back to Vox in a Box, the podcast that puts the voice in comics. I'm your host, Michael Corley. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we are covering Classic X-Men, number 66, in the 66th episode of Vox in a Box, titled Beyond the Farthest Star. Again, title different than the last one, but that's okay. And I'm going to take a second here. You know that I don't go into personal stuff too much. I'm all about the story. We're all about the story of the X-Men. We're not about the too much about different artists and writers and all the controversies that might go in, all that. I'm only here to tell you the story of the X-Men. But I'm going to take just a moment today to share this with you. This X-Men, originally posted as a regular X-Men, of course, and the Uncanny X-Men was the first one that I ever read as a child. You see, my parents would go out in the evening every few weeks, and they would buy me and my two brothers packs of comics. They came in 4 or 5, and they would buy them at the grocery store. And we'd rip them open and read them. And my brothers liked them okay, but I loved them. And this comic was the first X-Men that I ever read. Now, you'll see after reading this that this is the worst possible place to come in to the X-Men. It is got flashbacks, it's got hallucinations. You're introducing all these characters that you have no idea who they are, what their powers are, how they're related to each other. It's a nightmare, literally a nightmare. But I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the style. It intrigued me. And years later, good 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 years later, when I had the opportunity to start a regular subscription to Marvel Comics, the first one I picked was the X-Men, which began my long road that came to this podcast. So I hope you forgive me for scooting aside and give you Michael's little backstory on my origin story on the X-Men. I won't do it again, I promise. Now let's begin. Beyond the Farthest Star, we open with Wolverine. Now, today, we're used to Wolverine being in all comics. We're used to Wolverine having his own comic, having several of his own comics, but that really hadn't been done much before. There had been some earlier where we got a lot of Wolverine in one, but this one is pretty much just Wolverine, the entire comic. And it helps establish this lone wolf character just the way that we think of him today. It starts with his mind saying, I'm Wolverine. I'm a long way from home, and I think I'm dying. Wolverine is wearing the alien outfit that he had worn for the banquet that we saw him at the previous episode, but it's in tatters. And he's in an alien landscape. He's at strange trees, strange birds, bizarre flowers. He doesn't know what's going on. He just is trying to keep moving, and he keeps hoping things are going to get better. But he knows that's not very likely. Suddenly, he doubles over with pain. Something inside him is causing white-hot agony. A creature nearby, a plant-like alien, senses his weakness and wraps its long tentacles around him, gassing him. Using his adamantium claws, he slices the creature to ribbons. But the gas is doing its work. He's having a hallucination. Suddenly, he's back in Japan. He's riding on horseback with Mariko, the woman that he loves, and they're speaking to each other in Japanese, and she is saying, "You smile, Logan-san." And he's just thinking how beautiful she is and how she could possibly put up with a scrappy little runt like him. And she's telling him that she loves him not because of his outward appearance, but because he has the soul and grace of a true samurai. And they kiss. And he tells her that she is the bravest woman he knows. And he looks up and he sees something. There are birds coming, but there's something wrong about them. He could tell something's wrong. He grabs his hat and slaps Mariko's horse's rump, trying to get it to run, trying to get it to get away. But it's too late. The birds aren't birds at all. They're brood. And the brood aliens have their weapons. They fire. and Mariko is vaporized. He screams, and he realizes that it was a hallucination caused by the plant attacking him. He comes back to himself going, a dream, please, please let it be a dream, and the real brood are coming. He says their blasters are set for stun, but if that's stun, he'd rather be dead than get hit by it again. He's dodging them. They're coming in to get him. They think that he's running away, but really he's been setting himself up to leap directly at them. He leaps straight at the nearest one and buries his adamantium claws into the creature's chest. He's saying how dangerous these brood are. They have razor-sharp teeth. Their skin is an exoskeleton that's a kind of armor. Their tails are loaded with venom. They have wings. They have tentacle arms that are deadly in their own way. In other words, everything about the brood is deadly. Deadlier than any being in the universe except for Wolverine. He's slashing at them. He's killing them. He's ignoring their jabbing, venomous tails. When suddenly the ground collapses beneath him, he falls. He falls. He didn't even realize how high up he was. He was way up in the treetops of this strange place. And he falls until he strikes an enormous spiderweb. The shock of falling knocks him unconscious. When he comes to himself after a moment of undescribable pain from the fall, he realizes that he's ditched the hunters for now. And he looks around. He realizes now that daylight is coming. The jungle that he's in is no jungle at all. If you recall, the brood enslaved giant space whales. These beautiful creatures that are able to fly in space. When one of them die, rather than just abandon the corpse, the brood land it on a planet and turn it into a giant city. We get a 2-page spread, just beautiful, disgusting art of this slowly decaying space whale, a tiny little place where Wolverine is supposed to be. He's saying that the ribs of the space whale extend out beyond the breathable atmosphere, that eternity won't be long enough for it to decay into dust. Wolverine is realizing all he needs to do is pop his claws and cut himself loose from the spider web. But it's so hard to think. His brain is fuzzy. He can't concentrate. And then comes one of the other white-hot, sharp pains from his gut. He screams, and suddenly he's back on the ship. He and the other X-Men are enjoying their time with Lilandra. When suddenly Deathbird appears, they're all knocked unconscious. Suddenly he comes to himself. He looks around and he sees that there are broods everywhere. By the way, I enjoy this part. The Wolverine calls the brood sleazoids. So please enjoy as he yells out, "Sleazoids! We're their prisoners!" But the rest of the X-Men don't seem to mind. They and Carol Danvers are just enjoying themselves. And suddenly everything snaps back into focus and everything's fine. He's on a Shi'ar ship. There's no brood here. And he doesn't know what's going on. Two Shi'ar scientists come up and say that, to Carol Danvers, you're different than the other X-Men. And she's like, well, I'm not a mutant, but we'd like to examine you further. And she goes, oh, okay, sure. And suddenly Wolverine sees these aren't Shi'ar at all, but they're two broods, and they're carrying off Carol, and she's not resisting. He's trying to yell, but suddenly everything snaps back, and it's back in normal. They're in the Shi'ar place again, and the X-Men are wondering why he's acting so strangely. Each X-Men, in turn, go to Lilandra, and next to her is a giant Shi'ar queen, which doesn't make sense because, of course, Lilandra is the empress. There shouldn't be a queen. But they're each in turn presented to this queen. As it's Kitty's turn, she seems to sense something's wrong. She calls out, "Logan, please!" But Logan can't move. And the queen says, "Hush, small one. It is done." When it's Wolverine's turn, he knows something's wrong, but he can't move. He's hypnotized by this strange creature. Suddenly he sees that it's not a Shi'ar at all, but a huge, bloated mother of all things brood. And a giant pincer comes from out of its mouth, and he screams, "Ah!" arg, and he comes back to himself, to reality. He's back on the spiderweb. The scavengers from that area have heard his scream, and they think he's an easy lunch. They find out they're in for more than they bargained for. The battle is brutal. We show him slicing through alien flesh as they tear into his skin. I don't know if this is the first time that it says it. Probably it isn't. But Wolverine is thinking to himself, I'm the best there is at what I do. But what I do isn't very nice. And that becomes Wolverine's catchphrase later on. While he can't possibly kill all of the scavengers, as he kills enough of them, the rest of the scavengers turn on the injured, allowing him to escape. He manages to crawl up out of the spiderweb, make his way to a branch of the decaying giant space whale, and he lies down like an animal, like a dog who's been hit, and is just going to a place to lay down to die. He hopes it doesn't take too long. He remembers as he's dying that he woke last night in a sweat. He looked out and saw that he was in a Brood ship. He doesn't know what's going on. He goes and wakes up Storm. Storm, who sleeps naked. Yeah, imagine young Michael reading this, who sleeps naked, waking up. But Storm doesn't see anything. Everything is normal to her. They're just on a Shi'ar ship. He realized she would alert others that something was wrong with him, and he has to knock her unconscious with a nerve pinch. He goes in to check on Kitty, who he's begun to care about, as so many of the X-Men have, and he kisses her on the side of her head, saying that, don't worry, I'll come back. I'll help you somehow. In his mind, he imagines what it would be like to put his hand next to her head, to let his claws extend and kill her instantly. What's going on? Why are thoughts like this coming into his head? As he sneaks out, he sees one of Lilandra's Imperial Guard, Fang. This was, in fact, during their initial fight over the M'Kraan crystal. Fang was the one that Wolverine beat up and then stole his clothes. But Fang is not looking so good. He's smoking. He's screaming. He's saying that he was one of the ones who served Deathbird. Deathbird was your ally. And the Brood are just laughing at him, saying, the Brood need no allies. There are only enemies and slaves. We use Deathbird as we now use you. And in a horrid transformation, Fang screams. His body smokes and reshapes into that of a Brood. Now, Wolverine realizes what's really happened. All of the X-Men and Carol Danvers have been infected with a Brood egg. This fate that's happened to Fang is going to happen to every single one of them. And he couldn't help it. He screams out, no! And that's when the Brood realized he was there. That's when he began running. And shortly after that was when we first saw him at the beginning of the comic. But despite his laying down to die, he can't give up. He realizes he's an X-Men. The other X-Men are depending on him. Even if there is just the slightest hope that he might be able to save them, he's got to try. And as he looks out, he recognizes a Brood flying by. It was Fang. This was the one that had been Fang. It's testing out its wings for the first time. He's only got a second to decide. If he misses this Brood flying in the air, he's got miles to fall. Wolverine leaps into the air, grabs the Brood, and slashes off his barbed tail. He holds his claws to the Brood's face and says, cooperate, or I'll gut you. He forces the Brood to take him back to the Brood Palace. Even as he's almost there, suddenly, once again, the white-hot pain in his gut, it's so hard, he can't even scream. But his Brood prisoner realizes that he's got an opportunity, and he flips, sending Wolverine cascading into the other Broods. They say, take him, hunters, but if he resists, kill him. And there is a fantastic full page of Wolverine fighting 3-4 Brood simultaneously. Their tentacles are wrapped all around him. Their fangs, their pincers, their claws are all coming at him as he screams. Wolverine says they do their best. I do better. And we see him standing over their dead bodies. When the agony comes again, this time it is beyond description, beyond pain. It is literally murdering him. He hungers for oblivion. He wants to die if it will just take away this pain. And his body, just like that, of fangs, begins to smoke, begins to reshape, and he fights it. He feels the sensation of the brood. He feels the thoughts of the creature inside it trying to reshape his mind into that of a brood as it tries to reshape his body. But his skeleton is adamantium. The power of the brood can't affect that. He uses it as an anchor, and he makes one final all-or-nothing fight, crisscrosses his claws and screams. One of them is going to live, and one will die. Another sunrise comes, and Wolverine is still alive. Literally, every inch of his body is now scarred. It is as if he has begun to transform into a lizard-like creature, but stopped halfway. He's realizing that his mutant immune system saved him. It treated the alien parasite as a disease and fought it. That, combined with his adamantium skeleton, gave him enough of an anchor to destroy the egg. But the problem is, none of the other X-Men have his healing factor. He has no way to cure them, even if he can save them, even if he can wake them up from their hypnosis. They may all transform into brood, and if they do, he will have to kill them. And that ends Classic X-Men number 66. Now, but think back. Imagine yourself at the age of, say 8 or 9, and reading this comic for the first time, the first introduction to the characters in this bizarre, violent, trippy. You could see why naturally I had to read the X-Men, and I hope that you're enjoying these stories as well. If you've had a good time with this, do me a favor, if you would. Go to iTunes. Go to Vox in a Box, just search for it on there, and give me an iTunes review. What it does is it really helps people find the show and lets them know what it's about. And I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful day.